you did the podcast with Huberman, you had mentioned this with skipping.
I did that podcast, and I think we talked about skipping for 5 minutes, but that's the only thing that anybody got from that, to be honest.
You skipped for 10 miles.
Like, it's a much more efficient way of locomoting. Like, I can just bounce and skip for, I think I could do, like, I can go a lot longer than 10 miles, there's no question. I think it's really important for athletes to skip in all sorts of different ways. I think there's different velocities and different forces and different angles and getting more height and getting more distance and so on. There's more different frequencies.
3 to 5 lifts that are traditional lifts that you look at and you're like, okay, these lifts would be the fundamental lifts I would have a 14 to 18-year-old athlete do.
Choose the exercise that gets the knee behind the butt. So is that a rear foot elevated split squat? Is it just a split squat? Is it a reverse lunge? Is it a forward lunge? Like whatever that is, they're in the program from, if I'm starting coaching you when you're 12 and I'm still coaching you at 32, they're in there for 20 years.
What's the biggest failure you've had that you judge yourself on as a coach?
Oh man, you need to give me that question prior to jumping on here.
We're going to talk about why every single person should sprint, and we're going to start right now. So we were fortunate enough to sit down with the CEO and head Olympic sprint coach, Stuart McMillan, as we went into all of the different aspects around technique with sprinting, training for sprinting, longevity around sprinting, things that you guys can do today. Shout out to Stu McMillan for letting me interview him and just pick his brain. Now, let's get going. Okay, so we're here with Coach Stu McMillan, and I want to go right into, Stu, I want to go into, one, thank you for doing this. I appreciate this a lot. And then two, I wanted you to in the simplest form, sort of dissect and tell us how you see the phases of like the 100-meter sprint and the 200-meter sprint.
Dane, thanks for having me on. Great to be here. And I don't really look at it in phases, at least the 100. The 100 is, like, the sprint for me is a very coordinated, holistic whole, like this one big thing where every step is a result of the step that came before it. So to break it down into phases, often you chunk it. And I think breaking down into phases helps us make sense of some of the things. But from an athlete perspective, they need to think more about just pushing out as hard as they can and climbing with every single step and getting taller and lighter and freer and bouncier with every step, rather than, all right, I'm going to drive for X amount of steps. Then I'm going to transition for X amount of steps. And then I'm going to be upright for X amount of steps. But typically that's how people do think about it and how we maybe make sense of it sometimes. So there's block clearance, right? You get out of the blocks. Maybe block clearance is the first step, the first 3 steps. There's the drive phase, which is terminology that I do not like at all, which I think just forces athletes to think about driving and staying down longer than really they should be. Instead, I think they should be climbing out of their acceleration. There's the transition, which is kind of how we transition between the acceleration shapes that an athlete creates and the upright shapes that they create, which again, change every single step. So there's not one way of doing that. And then there's, maximum speed, which typically for the population that I work with is between 60 and 90 meters. That's going to be shorter and less distance the slower you are. So, your typical sort of maybe junior high or high school kid, it might be between 20 and 40 meters. And then speed maintenance or speed endurance. After that, you're just trying to endure or maintain the speed that you've got. So, but as I said, in 100, it's all one sort of holistic whole where you're just climbing from one step to the next. Now, the 200 is slightly different. The 200 is long enough such that you cannot just run it full out. You have to do something, so you have to have some tactical, strategic understanding of what you're doing there. And for me, there's really only 2 ways to run the 200. At higher levels, and this is a little bit different at lower levels, the person or the sprinter that runs from 20 to 120 the fastest, so the end of the bend. So the end of the bend basically is about 90 meters. Get onto the straightaway is about 120 meters. The person who's running fastest between that 90-meter mark and the 120-meter mark wins the race almost every single time. So then that gives us, okay, that's how do we set it up so you're running as fast as you can through that section? And there's two ways to do that. You can build through the entirety of the bend where you start off pretty easy, pretty smooth, and get faster, 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 faster. Or you can run as fast as you can and then just smooth it out in the middle of the bend and just what we call a sprint, float, sprint, where you sprint hard as you can, you float through the middle, and then you sprint off the bend as hard as you can. And that's really the only two ways to do it. So it's from a 200 perspective, that's kind of what I think about.
That makes sense. And I think it's fun, even as you're describing that, it's like fun for me to visualize races where it's like whoever's genuinely running the fastest, it doesn't mean they would be in the lead off the bend, but actually the fastest there. And as you were describing the shapes, and I was going to see can you walk us through, like, what are you looking for maybe from shapes in the sense of, start versus acceleration versus max velocity, the shapes or joints. And I want to get into, the hips and knee height and how the ankle is functioning, how the foot is grounding. Can you walk us through that as far as how you look at each of those, that holistic flow, but then the shapes and how they would transition and build upon each other?
Yeah, I mean, first, everything is individual and based upon the individual characteristics of the athlete or player in front of you, right? So you'll have elite sprinters will push out of the blocks at a projection angle of less than 30 degrees. And then that angle of projection will increase by about 3 to 4 degrees per step until it's vertical. So that's really low on their initial projection and very, very patient rise of inclination over the course of time. A typical, say, 15-year-old will project significantly higher than that, because if they try to project at 30 degrees, they just fall on their face. They would not be able to, impart enough force and be able to switch their limbs in time to get the foot back underneath the center of mass to take another step. They just don't have that force capacity yet. So it's all dependent upon that. What is more important and what is kind of the same between all athletes, regardless, is there is an inclination change from step to step. So the weaker you are, the slower you are, the initial projection will be higher, and the difference in change or the rate of change between each step will be more. So let's say, I'm old now and slow. I might project at 50 degrees, and then my next step might be 55 or 56 degrees. And it's only going to take me like 6 or 7 steps to be 90 degrees, like totally upright. So my acceleration, quote unquote, phase will be really, really short. And then from that perspective, or from that point, I'm just pushing straight down. I just down, 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 until the rest of the run happens, or until the run finishes. Where, as I said, like an elite sprinter, you'll see these guys, lining up in a few weeks here in Japan in the 100-meter final, and they'll push out at 30 degrees, and the next step will be 33, and then 36, and then 39, and then 42, and then 45, and it'll take them a long time to actually totally stand up, and it might be 40 meters before their torso is totally vertical. So kind of different from that perspective.
What do you see there? Would you see a difference in the degree in the rise between, let's say, Julian Alfred, Jefferson, Elaine when she was at her peak, versus someone now, like, thinking through, even if you're just looking at Noah Lyles, right? Like running 100, Christian Coleman in his peak running the 100. What do you see, or do you see anything different as far as the female versus male sprinter, as far as their strength and their ability to apply force in the early portion of the sprint?
I think you're seeing less and less. I mean, traditionally, if you go back 20 years or so, and it's still somewhat similar today, the average elite female has a higher step frequency than the average elite male. And obviously, and that's not relative, that's absolute, right? So the average elite female might have a step frequency of 4.8 to 4.9 steps a second. That's really high. So they're a little bit more reliant upon their frequency. Where the average elite male, it might be 4.65 to 4.75, somewhere around there. Now, that But now, as I was saying, going back 20 years, that was even more so. You had a lot of females that would just spin really, really fast. Like that was the way that a lot of coaches or a lot of athletes thought you had to be fast. You just span fast, and you don't worry too much about covering ground. I think we know a little bit more about the biomechanics of sprinting now, and we also know a little bit more that there's not a lot of differences between females and males in at least how their mechanics should look. So we're coaching males and females very similarly now. So we're not seeing a big difference in the relationships between frequency and length as we did like 20 years ago. So, but it is very much individual, right? You're going to see a guy like Christian Coleman who's quite short, like he's 5'6" or 5'7", whatever he is, and he's able to produce incredible amounts of force really, really quickly and switch his limbs extremely fast. So he's able to get his foot back underneath his center mass, even though he can push out at like 25 degrees. And let's say Julian Alfred is very similar, or Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price pushes out really, really low, right? But somebody like Sha'Carri Richardson just doesn't have that capacity. So she pushes out quite a bit higher, which is one of the reasons why she's a little bit further back at the start, because she just doesn't have the capacity to push out that low recovering time, get the foot back underneath the center of mass, and keep on doing that. So I think there's, to sum on that, there's probably more now individual differences that are not really necessarily have much to do with sex.
Yeah, that is clear. Now I wanted to go off of this with the shapes. Do you see like a consistency amongst, like you had talked about projection off the start and like 30 degrees and then rising every 3 to 4 degrees per step. It made me, and this is as a collegiate track athlete, I was a shot putter. I remember at the time I graduated in 2007. People were talking about Maurice Green. He had a low projection on the first during his start in the drive phase. But I remember our sprint coach in college talking about certain positions, certain shapes. He was not using the term shapes, can lead to an expose things like the hamstrings to more injuries. Is this something that you would see in the realm of sprint performance that tends to be pretty commonplace amongst most sprinters, that if they hit some type of poor position, they tend to have they might be more exposed to a hamstring injury or not?
Yeah, for sure. First, going back to Maurice Green there. Maurice Green's coach was John Smith. John Smith is the coach that coined the term drive phase back in the mid-90s. And his big thing was like staying down and staying over and keeping your torso in front of your center mass for as long as you possibly can. And for freak shows like Maurice Green and John Drummond and Otto Bald and some of the other athletes that were in John Smith's group at the time, it seemed to work. Like they were really, really good starters. They would it almost looked like they're running down or running through a tunnel. Like they would just look straight at the ground and just keep their head down for as long as they can, and until they couldn't anymore, and then they would just stand up and sprint as fast as they can. I think we know a little bit more about that now, but still some of that terminology and some of that philosophy on how to accelerate, you can still see it at some, especially lower levels. I think most of the elite sprint coaches now have moved past this way of doing things, because one of the reasons why this is not a good idea is there is a velocity increase with every single step. Every single step down the track until you reach maximum velocity increases, or it should be anyway, if you're doing it correctly, right? So because there's a velocity increase, because there's a kinetic improvement or difference, there should be a matching kinematic difference or improvement. So you should change every single step. And one of the reasons why you should do that, not just from a performance perspective, but as you pointed out, from a health perspective. If I continue to push out at the same angle, but I'm getting faster and faster and faster, then it's giving me less and less time for me to reposition my limbs and get my foot back underneath my center of mass. So if I've got less and less time to get the foot to the same place, then what happens? The foot starts coming further and further and further in front of the center mass, which puts more and more stress on the posterior chain, on the hamstrings. And that's when, I think it's the recent research is upwards of 80% of soft tissue injuries in the lower body is hamstrings. Upwards of 80% of those injuries occur when the foot is just about to impact the ground or has just impacted the ground. And that's primarily from, what we call sort of casting, when the foot gets out in front of the knee. So this is a really potentially injurious shape or position. So when the foot gets significantly out in front of the knee while we're accelerating, or even when we're upright, if it's too far out in front of the knee or too far out in front of the center mass, and then contacting the ground too far in front of the center mass on initial contact, there's too much force for the tissue to handle, and we put ourselves in potentially bad positions.
What's up, guys? Our podcast and our channel are sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. The entire focus of Peak Strength is to provide you guys with the absolute best sports performance app that you could ever imagine. We build out the programs on the back end. We take in all of these different decisions that we learned here on site at Garage Strength so that we can then apply it to you so you can improve your training. So if you guys want to improve your overall sports performance, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Download Peak Strength. You'll get a free week of training, and then you can start getting on those gains, get those reps done so that you can become a champion. Now, let's get back to the video. Peace. So I'll take this and say, you talked about the foot too far in front of the knee. This leads to a poor position and thus a soft tissue issue that likely will have an injury. If we're looking at this, is there, outside of maybe how they're projecting or how their torso is there anything, I want to get into like the foot and what you look for? Because I think a lot of strength coaches will talk about simple things like, be up on your toes, push through your toes, get forward and run on your toes. And as you know, I've listened or talked to different coaches that have sprint mechanics or some type of sprint background, it doesn't seem to be that way. And does that also, maybe there's some type of misinformation around what the foot is doing through different positions or different shapes in a sprint and from acceleration to max velocity, but also could the way the foot is formed during those different periods of grounding, could that also lead to just exacerbating this problem, I guess is my question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got a couple of buttons that we can press as coaches when we're trying to improve an athlete's movement. We've kind of got the structural button, which is improving or trying to improve the athlete's structure. So whether that's joint structure or bone structure or whatever that is, it's typically takes a long time to do those types of things. Typically, we're looking at their years. It's chronic things that we're trying to improve or act upon. Second is the kind of the physical structure, the function. So these functional capacities, the ability to produce force, how fast you can produce that force, the velocity, the range of motion, the endurance, the repeatability, the control of the limbs in space and time. So all of these things that we can push these buttons to try to impact how they move. So if, for example, if I'm trying to get you faster, or if I'm trying to get like a 14-year-old kid faster, I don't necessarily have to get their technique faster. I can just improve their force producing capacity, and they will get faster because they're stronger. Pretty simple. So we don't have to actually even impact technique. We can impact all of these other sort of physical or functional things. And finally, the third button that we can impact is the technical button. So what are you actually doing in space and time? What are you thinking about? How are you trying to reposition your limbs? What are you doing with your shin angles? What are you doing with your torso angles? How are you swinging your arms? What are you doing with your thighs? What are you driving with your knees? Are you pushing down? Are you pulling forward? How stiff are you trying to hold your feet and ankles in space? So all of these things play a role. So when it comes into as you said specifically, you're looking at the foot and ankle. For me, this is a key, and it's probably the low hanging fruit in developmental sprinting and team sports sprinting. If you think in the analogy I give when I go and visit team sport athletes or team sport coaches is and I ask them, if you were a boxer and you were hitting a heavy bag as hard as you possibly can, what are you going to do with your wrist and your fist? And it's pretty simple. It's a very simple question. It's a very simple answer. They all know, right? Well, I'm going to squeeze my fist really, really tightly and hold my wrist as rigidly as I
Yeah,
can.
you're
You're
not
not
doing.
doing it like that, right? Why
Yeah.
not? Because you can't produce any force and you're going to hurt yourself.
Mhm.
And I asked him, do you know how hard an elite boxer hits a heavy bag? Like in the amount of force they hit it
5
with?
times body weight.
5 times body weight. It's huge, right? That's a lot of force. You know how fast it is?
I don't know how.
How long it takes to hit peak forces? It's
Uh,
about 300 to
point.
400.
Yeah. I was gonna say 0.3 to 0.4. I didn't know exactly, but I thought about that.
Yeah, it's really fast.
Yeah.
And then I said, guess what else is just like that?
Running
Sprinting,
down the track. Yeah.
running down the track.
Mhm.
If you're fast, you're hitting the ground somewhere between 3, 4, and 5 times body weight in peak forces. And peak forces occur in about 3, 4, or 5 hundredths of a second. So what do you want to do with your foot and your ankle if this is the case? Why do we focus so much around what's going on in the fist and the wrist when you're punching, but ignore the importance of what the foot and the ankle is doing as we're punching the ground? It's
Mhm.
everything. And
Mhm.
how do you do that, right? It's all three of those buttons. It's the structural button. Can't you dorsiflex properly? You just don't have the range of motion to be able to do that. Do you lack the force producing capacity of the, say, gastroc or soleus or Achilles or whatever? You just don't have the strength down there to be able to handle your body weight or that much body weight in forces that quickly. Or is it a technical thing where you just don't know and you're just running high on your toes, as you said? And then the higher you're running on your toes, the more compliant you become, the less stiff you are, and so on and so forth. So first of all, it's contingent upon us as coaches is to figure out what the problem is. Is the problem one of, like, if somebody has zero range of dorsiflexion ability structurally or functionally, and we're actually we're trying to get them to dorsiflex, and it doesn't matter
Mhm.
how much coaching instruction we give them about trying to get them to dorsiflex, get off your toes, they can't do it. So we have to align the problem with the appropriate solution first and foremost. Second, I guess, it's just I don't go on off on a bit of a tangent here, Dane.
No, this is perfect. This is
But
great.
like this stiffness is something I feel like is misconstrued or misunderstood in many of these conversations. And it is a pretty complex and challenging topic. The way in which most people who look at sprint biomechanics or running biomechanics look at it is there's 3 types of stiffness. There's local joint stiffness. And in the case in what we're talking about here is specifically ankle stiffness. Now, ankle stiffness is really important in sprinting for the first 3 steps, maybe 4 steps. Like, it is a major KPI. You will not see an elite sprinter or an elite athlete who has super fast 5 yards, for example, who doesn't have really, really good specific ankle joint stiffness. Like, that's a major KPI. So if you are a linebacker, if you are an offensive lineman, if you're a running back, and it's important for you to have a really fast first 2, 3, 4 steps, ankle stiffness is going to be really important for you. As you move down the track, as you get a little bit faster, it's not necessarily just about the specific ankle joint now. It's the ankle and the knee together, or leg stiffness. So we call that leg stiffness, and it's the compliance and the relationship and the coordination between both the foot ankle and the knee joint. So it's how do those play in space and time. And that's important up until about the time you're almost upright. So you're talking about this knee stiffness or leg stiffness. And when you're upright, the type of stiffness that's the most important here, and which is the one that separates elite sprinters from non-elite sprinters, is what's called systemic stiffness, or sometimes vertical stiffness. And that's the coordination between all of the joints in the lower body. So the ankle, the knee, and the hip together, how all of these coordinate in space and time, and it's not necessarily about more stiffness is better. It's how the foot and ankle and knee and hip all coordinate. What is that timing like? So that's, as I said, I think there's a lot of confusion about stiffness, but we have to first define our terms and know what type of stiffness we're actually thinking about. Like if you're a football player, spend a lot of time getting really, really stiff ankles, like really work on the isometric force capacity of your Achilles and your calf and your soleus. Like that's really, really important. If you're an elite sprinter, that's important, but it's nowhere near as important as how all of your lower body joints coordinate in space and time.
And when you're saying that with like a field sport like football, I was even just thinking about it's probably even more of a low-hanging fruit because the shoes that they're putting their foot, that they're applying force into the surface, they're on turf or grass. And then there's a little bit longer, there's a lot longer time into the ground, into the earth. So really, if they have, if they don't have a stiff ankle joint in conjunction with their knee, especially, they're not going to be able to move as quickly into a block or off of a block or out of a cut, whatever it might be. Is that sort of what you're saying as far as what team sports could see this as a pretty big benefit?
100%. The softer the surface, the softer the shoes, the more important it is. Think about what the joint has to do if you're sprinting on sand, for example, right? Like, it has to stiffen way more. I've got a bit of a theory. This is not backed by anything, but most of the Jamaican sprinters spend the first 4 or 5 or 6 months of every season training on grass, like a softer surface than the track. And I feel like there's something in that softer surface that leads to a positive stiffness adaptation in the tissues. And I feel like, it's one thing that it's harder, obviously, in the north of, the northern hemispheres, when it's hard to sprint outside, from November through March. But it's, we spend as much time as we possibly can training on a softer surface until we have to transition onto a track surface from a specificity standpoint. But for sure, I think that's a really important piece, like that specific joint stiffness of the ankle, and then the coordination of the ankle and knee together is really, really important for team sport athletes, football players, soccer players, rugby players, so on and so forth.
Okay, so I want to go, you got the technical button. I want to veer off a little bit to the technical discussion, but then I want to come back to the joint stiffness discussion. So I'm just trying to lay this seed out there for myself, is that I'm thinking about the one sprinter from might be Botswana or South Africa that's known right now, young kid that sort of like flails and like is sort of all over the place.
Man, that guy's, it's Wamaza or Samaza or whatever it is. Yeah, I do know who you're meaning.
Okay, and I'm even thinking about when I watch someone like him run versus a tradition, like a very technically sound, I would say Justin Gatlin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of people would see him as like a pretty technically sound sprinter. Do you as a coach see that and say like he's not? I guess my question is, he's not stiff, or do you look at him and you're like, that's just the way he's moving. That's like what in theory could be helping him get to that point. Where's the give and take? Because I even think about this with Prandini, like the fact that you had her run in qualifying this year, if I remember off of times, she ran like a 10.95 in qualifying, and she's just looking different. She looks different than she has in like the last few years from what I can remember. And I guess, and maybe, I don't know if that's just me, but I feel that way. And I'm wondering like, where's the give and take? How do you approach that as a coach? And I'm looking at what you've done with Prandini versus if you took this kid and you changed him to not have that crazy, almost like wobble. It's like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a wobble. That's the perfect way to describe that, right? It's if you're watching or listening to this, I think his name is Walaza. Look at South African sprinter U20 and you'll see it.
Yeah.
He's got the most unique sprinting gait of any fast sprinter, probably in history.
Fast, yeah, that's the best.
Like fast sprinter. Like there's
not
some
high school kids.
Yeah, exactly. But like he's doing one thing on one side of his body and the entirely opposite thing on the other side of the body. Like it's really, really interesting. And it's a lesson for us to remember, right? Like if you or I went in there as a coach and tried to change this guy and try to make him run symmetrical, there's only one guaranteed result for that. He gets slower.
Yeah.
For sure, right? So we have to remember that we can only run in a way in which our body allows for, or we can only move in a way in which our body will allow. So if you're trying to get a football athlete to do a full squat, but they don't have the mobility of the ankle and hip joints to do a full squat, they're not going to be able to do a full squat, right? And it's the same when you're sprinting. Like if you're you will only move in a way in which your body will allow. So this is what's allowing for him. So it's the difference between kind of what's efficient for an individual and what may be more effective for a mathematical model. If you're writing up a model of how to sprint, or if a biomechanist or a physicist is putting together a mathematical model of the best way for a human being to sprint, they're not coming up with this way that Walazza runs. And I apologize if I've got his name.
No, you got it. That's what I was just doing on my phone. I'm like, I gotta check on this.
Cool.
Bayanda Walazza.
Walazza, good.
Yeah.
You wouldn't come up with that model, right? No
Right.
chance. Like you'd come up with something that's closer to what maybe Noah Lyles looks like, who's really, really effective. But what's different with Walazza is, that may not be the most effective for the average of all averages or what we've come up with as a biomechanical, most effective mathematical model. It is what's most efficient for him based on the things that he's got. He's just running as fast as he can. Do you think he's trying to do something different on one side than he is on the other? No. He's just trying to run from this line to that line as fast as possible. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, as I said, that it's long-term the most effective model for him. But it's not, but the button that we press when we're trying to impact or to try to improve how he moves is not going to be a technical one. It will be almost certainly a structural one. We have to ask the question, why do you move this way? And is it a problem? And I would think if I'm coaching him and he's 18 years old or 19 years old, he's not going to run crazy fast times that way. That's my sort of working assumption. So then it is a problem. Then what is the problem? Like what is going on? What is leading him to run this way? What is the position of his pelvis, for example? That's the first thing you're looking at is his pelvic structure. Then you're looking at his spine. What is his spine doing that is making him move this way? What is the length of his femur? What is his leg length? What is his hip extension capacity from a more functional perspective? Like, are these things, like where are the roots of these asymmetries? So then I can come up with, say, some sort of safe to fail experiment to try to impact that or improve that. So first and foremost is asking ourselves, whenever we're trying to improve or look at how an athlete moves, and it's a little bit different from what we may expect, our first question is how this person moves problematic, or is it just their unique solution to this task that is unique to them, but not necessarily a problem? And the second step then is, all right, we've said that this is a problem, and I've looked at Walazza and said, okay, long term, right now it's not a problem because we're not going to change this short term. But long term, we think we can improve upon this. So let's look at that. And all right, what is the problem then? Like, what is the button that we press? Mm-hmm. So you brought up Jenna Prandini, somebody I started coaching this year. Her problem was, she's 5'8.5". She's crazy elastic. When she was went to University of Oregon with a coach there, Curtis Taylor, she had a step length of about 235 centimeters, so 2.35 meters. Like a really nice bouncy step length. It was running 10 nines and 21 nines. Like really big and open and bouncy. The way in which you'd probably expect, looking at her, to sprint. Now, over the course of the last sort of 8 to 10 years, her step length has gone less and less and less and less and less. And when her running as fast as she could last year, her step length was 224 centimeters. That's really short for somebody who's supposed to be an elite sprinter, and especially an elite sprinter who's 5'8.5". Mm-hmm. So our goal was to improve that. Now, that's not a technical button that I press. I'm not going to say to her, hey, I want you to stay on the ground a little bit longer and push a little further so we can get a longer step. Instead of that, it's all right, what is the restriction here for her getting a little greater step length? And for me, her spine wasn't moving at all. She was running like this. So I need to get the spine moving a little bit, the shoulders moving a little bit, so we can have a little bit more coordination between what's going on in the lower body and what's going on in the upper body. So we did a lot of work trying to improve the mobility of her T-spine. We did a lot of work trying to improve the mobility of her shoulder blades, and how the shoulder blades was gliding up and down her rib cage, as well as trying to work on her force producing capacity so she can actually hit the ground a little bit harder. And the run that you're talking about in the first round of USA's, where she ran 10:95, her step length was 238 centimeters. So it was actually the longest step length of all of the female sprinters on the line that day, and she had the second highest velocity. Unfortunately, it went downhill from there over the next couple of days. We were dealing with a bit of an injury that she just wasn't able to come back from. But that's always as I said, the first question when we're seeing movement is this asymmetry, or is this different, or is this unique thing that we're seeing a problem? If it is, what is the genesis of this problem? Is it a structural genesis, a functional genesis, or a technical genesis? And then you just try to put strategies in place to try to improve upon it.
So I guess taking almost looking at Walata, and when you were describing it with like the math equation, I was envisioning like Ralph Mann while he was still alive and doing work, right? Or Ken Clark, like they're sitting there and they're like mathematically formulating some sprinter, and that sprinter's here, and this, the South African's over here. And then you're saying essentially to bridge that gap, like let's pretend that Ralph Mann's designed the crazy, like, or whoever it is designs this perfect mathematical sprinter to move this individual over. It's really, you're saying attack the structural movements first and really, really just attack that. And then over time, you will likely see the technical change, especially at an elite level. It's going to be different at a younger level. I guess my next question would then be, and this is where I wanted to sort of, is that sort of fair? Like how you're describing that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love Ralph. I've known Ralph for a long time. Rest in peace. He's a great man. I think he did some great work. I disagreed with almost everything he said from a biomechanical perspective. You can't treat an individual as the average of all individuals, which is what you're trying to do when you set up a model. He set up a model and then tried to teach all of the athletes to run this way, which was the average of all the elites. Mm-hmm. No elite is the same as any other elite. How can you train Christian Coleman the same as Justin Gatlin or Usain Bolt or Noah Lyles? Yeah. Or Trayvon Bromell? These are all very, very different people, which is really kind of counterintuitive, right? You look at the 8 fastest people on Earth lining up for a 100-meter Olympic final or World Championship final. This is by definition, an extremely homogeneous population, but all move in very, very different ways, extremely different ways. And that's kind of my point. No individual is the average of all individuals. Yeah. So you have to figure out, first and foremost, what it is that makes this individual fast or good or whatever it is at what they do, in this case, sprinting. Like Usain Bolt is really good at sprinting because he has a step length of 275 centimeters, not because he's got incredible frequency, where Christian Coleman is the exact opposite, right? So you wouldn't coach these guys the same, and you wouldn't coach them towards the same model. So it's an understanding us first and foremost is what makes you unique at what you're doing, and how do I lean into that more? And maybe, all right, what are some of the limiting factors for you, especially when you're working with younger athletes? All right, this is what you're good at. What are you not so good at that we can also try to improve upon over the next year or years? Whereas, at this level here that I'm working at now, it's more identifying that unique ability and leaning into that more. Like if I'm coaching Christian Coleman, for example, he's, one of the best starters of all time, maybe the second best ever. So you try to feed that. You try to make him better at that, right? Because if you're trying to lengthen his stride or get him better at what he's not so good at, you're taking away maybe from his gift a little bit, right? Because there's no free lunch here. You're always robbing Peter to pay Paul in some sense.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, when you were talking about, actually, when you mentioned Prandini, you had mentioned just increasing her force capacity, but I was even going to pull this back to the ankle stiffness, the leg stiffness, the vertical stiffness. If you have like field sports, or even in Pranditi's case, maybe, what movements or exercises are you looking at to try to improve that from that perspective, as like how to increase stiffness throughout the ankle, the knee, and the relationship between the ankle, the knee, and even the relationship then between the ankle, the knee, and the hip?
My friend Randy Huntington did some incredible work on this. He coached Su Bingtian in China. Randy's a legendary sprints and jumps coach. Coached Mike Powell to the world record that still stands to this day, and coached Su Bingtian over the course of the last 8 years of his career to the Asian record and being fifth at the Olympic Games and the fastest 60 meters of all time. And one of the things that he identified with Su when he first started working with him was this lack of ankle stiffness capacity. Like, he just didn't have it. So he's a big believer in doing seated calf raises and then periodizing a seated calf raise over the course of time. It's sort of a similar periodization way in which most people would work. Let's work on hypertrophy first. Let's work on maximum strength or maximum force capacity second, and then work on kind of the ability to transfer that from a speed power perspective third. So that's kind of how they did it over the course of many years, and got him to be incredibly stiff on the ground, where he now has the fastest recorded ground contact time ever in history, male or female sprinter, of 0.074 on the ground. So that's kind of the way in which, especially over the course of the last sort of 8 to 10 years now, that most coaches, most strength coaches, and that are interested in this space have been using it, whether that's based upon Danny Lum's research or Alex Natera's work, or the work of coaches like Randy, right? Just, we're trying to improve first and foremost the isometric force capacity of the the plantar flexors of the foot, so the soleus and the gastroc. So high intensity, really, really low volumes, probably twice a week, probably looking at maybe 4 to 5 sets of 15 seconds ish. So like 3 by 5 seconds or 5 by 3 seconds, as hard as you possibly can, twice a week over the course of time. And that's how we've done it as well. Essentially, it's we don't always work on the high intensity isometrics. Sometimes it's a little bit more dynamic than that, but sometimes we complex it with like ankle hops and things like that as well. But primarily, that's the objective. The objective is just to increase the isometric force capacity of the plantar flexors.
When you're talking about that, even there with I was just thinking about, so with, like, you're saying essentially seated calf raise, let's say traditional seated bodybuilding style calf raise, but then that could move into next period. You're doing the Alex Patera. I almost want to get like an example where you take a book and you're like, all right, we're here, or this is a plate, and we're putting force in while we're keeping our heel elevated, and we're just holding that position, pushing up into an immovable object for 3 to 5 seconds. And then maybe that could transfer into some type of super dynamic movement. I remember actually in the Altus course with Randy, like seeing Su Bing doing really, really cool stuff with his ankle. And it's just basically simple progression over 6 months, and then see what happens as you get into the competitive season. Is that accurate there?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Very accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you're looking at, my next question would be, if we're looking at, I've heard you talk about this. I've heard Dan talk about this as well, like the knee behind the glute in sprinting. And I wanted to see, I wanted you to go into this a bit, where it's like, what are you looking at in maybe younger or not as talented athletes that haven't been developed yet? Maybe not that they're not talented, they just haven't been developed. As far as even drills and when someone is sprinting, that knee getting behind the glute when they are actually running or doing bounding or anything like that, what are, specifically, what's the benefit of that being almost a point of focus as a coach?
This is something that my friend Kelly Starrett and I started talking about like 15 years ago, the importance of this pattern, the pattern of what he calls the knee behind the butt pattern, or the hip extension pattern, essentially. It is the true fundamental movement pattern or foundational movement pattern. as many coaches have come up with their lists, a Dan John's list of 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, and every other coach has their squat, carry, rotate, pull, press, whatever. The one that's missing from most of those lists is the hip extension pattern, the knee behind the butt pattern, and it is key to running fast. Like, there's not a single person on the planet who runs fast regardless of the task that doesn't have a good knee behind the butt pattern. So what does that mean? First and foremost, does the knee get behind the butt without the pelvis dumping into anteversion and getting into hyperextension through the lumbar? So that would be, all right, we need to be able to get the knee behind the butt without actually negatively affecting the mechanics of the pelvis and what happens there upwards from there through the spine. So that means that we have to have at least some sort of range of motion that allows the knee to get behind the butt. And here's something that's a little bit counterintuitive, at least in sprinting, is an elite sprinter almost has negative hip extension capacity from a range of motion perspective. So if you tested their passive range of hip extension, it's very, very small. In fact, in many of them, it's negative. And they require massive amounts of force to be able to actually get the knee behind the butt. Because without that, let's say you've got a ballet dancer or somebody that comes from a dancing or a gymnastics background, and they started sprinting, the foot would just stay on the ground forever. So your knee would end up way behind the butt, and you'd just be slow because you're on the ground for too long. So there's always this inverted U, right? There's this Goldilocks kind of moment where just enough is just right, and that differs from sport to sport, from task to task, to athlete. But in elite sprinting, it's really important for the knee to get behind the butt, but only when you're applying as much force as you possibly can, or this significant amount of force that requires to get it there. So first, do you have the range? Second, can you actually produce enough force to get it back there? So if you're coaching a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old basketball player or soccer player, they'll have no problem getting the knee behind the butt. They'll have the range of motion to be able to get it back there. They may not be very fast, though, because they're just not applying any force. So your way to get a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old faster is just get them stronger. That's why there's a really big relationship between force and velocity when you're kids, but not as much of a relationship when you're super elite. Because just the ability to just produce force, they don't have that yet. They don't have that capacity yet. So you need to improve that, and that's what's going to improve that pattern, and therefore the horizontal projection of the center mass, and therefore your speed. So you've got range of motion, you've got force capacity, you've got the velocity of the limb. Do they have the ability to actually move the limb through space and time fast enough? Do they have the ability to control it in space and time? Now, the elite sprinters certainly do. A 14-year-old almost typically don't, right? The limbs are going all over the place. And this is why many of the coaches who work in this space may reduce or isolate these patterns into smaller exercises or smaller drills to try to improve the control and coordination of the limbs. So break that down into something a little bit smaller. And finally is the repeatability or the endurance of it. Like, can you do that over and over and over and over and over again, based upon whatever your task is? So it's the importance of getting the knee behind the butt is key. That means it gets behind the butt to the point which is the Goldilocks for you and your task and as an individual. And then do you have the force, the velocity, the range, the repeatability, and the control to do that? For your task or your sport.
Almost makes me think that even when you're describing that, I have two questions. One's not related to this, but it made me think about, as I'm getting older, doing skips, sprints, bounds, and I'm heavier. I'm 220. So it's like those things, and even being able to get the knee behind the butt. And so we do a lot of lifts here where we have a single leg roller. So we have our back leg elevated, and we do a lot of single leg squats. Almost all of our athletes basically just either single leg squat, and then we do cleans and stuff like this. But when I'm doing that movement, a single leg squat with my knee behind my butt, and I know it's not doing the skipping part, but it really it makes me think, and I have to try a lot harder as I'm aging. And I'm almost wondering if there is that correlation there as we're getting older. Maybe we should be paying more attention to what you and Kelly are talking about with that, knee behind the butt patterning related to individuals who are getting stiff in the sense that they're just losing joint movement, right? As they're 60, 70, 80 years old. It makes me think there's probably something to that. I don't know exactly what it would be, but it's an interesting thought on that topic.
100% there is, man. 100%. I start feeling that now. Like I'm 55. It's harder and harder and harder for me to extend my hip. I need to focus more on it. I really do. I think it's really important in sport. It's probably more important for us who are no longer in sport, and just to move well and feel good about ourselves when we're moving around the planet as we age.
It made me think, because we're sitting all day too. We're at a computer or whatever, doing a podcast, right? And it's like, I remember when you did the podcast with Huberman, you had mentioned this with skipping, and I go out and I'll go on runs, and without fail, it's like the first 10 to 15 seconds of me skipping, I'm like, wait, how do I have to do this again? Okay, this is what I need to do. Okay, now I got it. And then I can get moving, and I'm like really, really good. And it's like, if we're not practicing that, we lose that movement, we lose that explosive strength. And then all of a sudden you're 60, 70 and it's snowing outside and you slip and fall and you're toast. And it's like, that's where I think you would find that benefit, is preventing that fall or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It's funny. I did that podcast, and I think we talked about skipping for 5 minutes, but that's the only thing that anybody got from
the thing that I got out of that is that you skipped for 10 miles. What?
Yeah, I did. I don't like, I don't mind jogging. I just really prefer skipping. Like, it's a much more efficient way of locomoting for me. Like, I can just bounce and skip I think I could I can go a lot longer than 10 miles. There's no question. I'm not saying that to brag. It's just pretty easy for me. Like, I think probably because I've demoed these types of movements for going on 5 years now. It's just, this is easy for me, and I can just skip along, and it's just really rhythmical. I just enjoy it a lot more. It's yeah, I think there's something. I really do think there's something in it. Like, I think it's really important for athletes to skip in all sorts of different ways. I think there's way more benefits, for example, in doing skipping drills where you're pushing the knee behind the butt in different velocities and different forces and different angles, and getting more height and getting more distance and so on. There's more different frequencies. Like, there's lots of different ways to skip. I think that's much more important to do those types of drills, the hip extension drills, than it is to do the hip flexion drills where you're just doing the high knees, or high knee skips, or high knee runs, or whatever.
Okay, and that's where your controversy around, I think you did a post recently on Instagram of like, stop doing A drills or something. If I remember, it was something along these lines. People were like blowing gaskets. Is that where you're looking at, like, focus more on true hip extension, knee behind the butt patterning?
Yeah. What you do on the ground is way more important. What you're doing in the air is a result almost exclusively of what goes on the ground. How much force, how fast, and what direction.
Okay, so I want to take this because I've got two questions here related to talking about the 14-year-old kid. They can get stronger and they'll be able to apply more force, thus run faster. So my question with that is, in most cases, this is, I'm generalizing quite a bit, but in most cases, I would agree with this, where it's like, you teach a kid how to squat or single leg squat or clean or trap bar jump heavier or whatever it might be, they gain some type of ability to apply more force. My question would be along these lines: is there specific developmental, let's say 3 to 5 lifts that are traditional lifts that you look at and you're like, okay, these lifts would be the fundamental lifts I would have a 14 to 18-year-old athlete do, and then once they get to this point of diminishing returns, then it's like, if this, then that, they go to the next level? Do you have anything along those lines that you like to use with athletes, or even with coaches, as far as development's concerned?
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily the lifts would change a lot. I think how you would execute those lifts and what part of the lift that you would focus more on as you age would change. So for me, choose the exercise that gets the knee behind the butt. So is that a rear foot elevated split squat? Is it just a split squat? Is it a reverse lunge? Is it a forward lunge? Like whatever that is. Like for me, it was always a split squat. Like I feel like a split squat, a reverse elevate, a rear foot elevated squat are they're in the program from, if I'm starting coaching you when you're 12 and I'm still coaching you at 32, they're in there for 20 years. Like that's really important. I think the ability to actually generate high amounts of force is really important for all athletes, regardless of the sport. And I feel like the exercise that is the most dummy proof to be able to do that is a trap bar deadlift. So a trap bar deadlift is something that we do. Again, if I'm working with a 12-year-old, I'm still working with them 20 years later. I'm still doing some sort of trap bar deadlift. Now, to begin with, it's just the generation or the production of force that we're focused on. Can you actually produce force systemically through the system to be able to move in this way? So I think the focus is on more concentric force capacity. Like that's it. Until the point, as you say, you reach a rate of diminishing returns on that. And then we can start becoming a little bit more specific to whatever the task of the sport that is most important to the athlete. And what are the contraction types within that? Is it more isometric? Like, are you working with an offensive lineman, for example? Well, then we're going to focus a lot more on isometric force capacity than we are on eccentric. But if you're working with a sprinter or a defensive back, where it's more about eccentric or elastic force, then we're going to be working more on that, right? So it might be like reflexive eccentrics, or it might be to begin with accentuated eccentrics and then complex with, say, more elastic work like reflexive eccentrics or bounding. So I don't think the exercises change significantly. It's just the manner in which we do them. I think those are the two that you'll see in all my programs and have always seen in all my programs. And then I'll, choose your Olympic lifting variation, whatever. That's not for me. That's not that important. You can choose whatever, whether it's a hang clean or a dead hang clean or full clean, or dumbbell snatches or what have you. I think that the two for me, it would be the trap bar deadlift and the some variation of a split squat.
Okay. Do you have like a pound for pound, like a ratio based off of like, if our athlete weighs 180, we want these lifts to be this specific ratio, and then we're changing the way that we're setting up that program, or is that's not how it would roll?
I don't.
Okay.
Because again, it goes back to like, what is it that makes the athlete fast? If the range of that would be so wide that it's almost, here's the average. But is it really telling us what we want it to tell us? Like, why would I? If I say, I started coaching Andre DeGrasse in 2016, I coached him for 3 years. He could never clean more than 70 kilos at the time. I think the most weight I ever put on his back was 80 kilos. Like, he's weak. Like, he's really, really weak in traditional ways in which you would define what strength is. He didn't have that. But he had incredible elastic strength. Eccentric rate of force development was incredible. RSI through the roof. His ability to bound through the roof. He ran 990 and 1980 off of that strength level. When he moved on to another coach and worked a lot more on developing these more traditional force capacities or strength capacities, did he get any faster? Stayed the same. So that's not what makes him fast. That's what it kind of goes back before, is we have to make the determination of whether this relative weakness is actually a relative weakness that if we improve that, would it improve his performance in the task that is the most relevant, i.e. running 100 meters or 200 meters as fast as he can? Or is it just something that's going to take time away from doing the thing that makes him good? So that's always kind of the decision that we have to, or the conversation we have to have with ourselves.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like looking at someone like, because I think if you look at Noah Lyles and you see the stuff he puts out, it's like, dude's cleaned 275 plus squat. I've seen him front squat like 400, which I think is absolutely insane at his body weight. But that actually might be why he runs fast. I don't know. But at the same time, you can't take that and then put it on DeGrasse or put it on, somebody else and say, this is going to be what is your, you can play around with that as a coach for a little bit to see if anything drastic changes. But if it doesn't, it's like, well, it's not worth playing around with.
There's a Kiwi sprinter by the name of Tian Welpton. If you're not familiar with him, you should check him out. So he's coached by a friend of mine, Angus Ross, or Dr. Angus Ross. Dr. Angus Ross was a Kiwi bobsledder, 25, 30 years ago. He runs the strength and performance department at the New Zealand Institute of Sport. He coaches Tian. Tian's 6'4", 185 pounds. He's ran 10:10, 6:49, and a 60, and he's cleaned 180 kilos. This guy's a freak show.
Yeah,
like an absolute freak. Like it's I think he's hand cleaned like 155 for a triple. Like it's really, really impressive. But that's him. That's one of the reasons why he's fast. But it's also often your greatest strength is your greatest weakness.
Yeah, yep.
Like I coached Dwayne Chambers back in 2010, 2011, 2012 when I was in the UK. Dwayne's one of the strongest sprinters probably in history. Like the guy was very, very, very strong. Trap bar deadlifted 280 kilos for 10, for example. Like that's a lot.
Yeah.
But it was, and he won World Indoors. He ran 6:42. But his greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. He applied incredible amounts of force, but it took him a long time to apply those forces. So while he was really good to it, through 30 to 40 to 50 meters, by the time he stood up, he still needed that time. So he didn't have that elastic, that, eccentric rate of force development where he could just get on and get off, like some of the guys who would just roll by him from 60 to 100. He was great to 60, but now he's on the ground for too long, just like Tian Welpton, on the ground too long and just losing the race in the last 30, 40 meters.
So if somebody's got, let's say with the eccentric force capacity, are you looking, and in this case, using Chambers as an example, who I think I've seen 100 memes of Chambers here, skinny, frail, finished distance runner here. It's like, do you want to look like a sprinter? Or do you want to look like a distance runner? So Chambers, to paint this picture, is like bodybuilding physique, in my opinion, anyway. He's just got he phenomenal physique. Do you take that and you say, okay, let's play to the strength, but then how do you develop, or how do you spend time on bounding, skipping, dribbles, and those movements to try to develop? Like, how much time would you then as a coach try to develop that weakness, knowing that his eccentric force capacity, it's off on the spectrum, and there's got to be some way to improve that to then initiate that response for him from 50 to 100 meters, on the track?
I mean, that's the question, right? And that's kind of what I was alluding to before when I talked about Christian Coleman. So when we looked at Dwayne, when I started coaching Dwayne, he was 32 years old. And he ran 997. He ran 987 when he was having some, supplemental assistance. But he was clean when I was coaching him. He was, this would be 6-8 years after that fact. And he had ran 997 at 32. So he's got a signature. He's got a way of running. But could he run 990 running that way? And we made the determination that probably not. Like, what are you going to do? Just run 632 rather than 642? Or are we at the rate of diminishing returns on that capacity? We can't squeeze any more juice out of this bottle here. Mm-hmm. So the only way for you to get faster is maybe by trying to develop this other capacity that you don't have. Understanding that it might steal a little bit away from what you do have. As I said, there's no such thing as a free lunch here. You're always having some sort of, there's some sort of Peter-Paul relationship here. So we had a conversation with him, and that's, we determined to do that. This is what we ended up doing. So he went from 642 the year prior to running, I think, 650. But he still ran 997. So it's like you've got this envelope of stuff that's available to you. And sometimes when you're working with older athletes, it's just how you organize all the stuff in there sometimes, like we can't necessarily make the envelope bigger or stuff more stuff into it. we're just moving things around. And that's kind of what it seemed like with him. I don't know if say, for example, I started coaching him when he was 28 instead of 32. Do we have more time to develop those capacities that he can improve to 995 or 992 or 990 or 985? Or whether it was 24 or 20, right? These are the conversations that we have with ourselves whenever we see athletes, right? If we're working with a 16-year-old, then it's pretty easy. We're going to spend relatively more time on the things that they suck at or that are limiting their long-term growth and development. But if you're working with a 32-year-old, you're probably not spending a lot of time on that stuff. You're spending more time on what they're good at.
Yeah. Okay. I want to see, I work a lot with, that population of 12 to 16. And I also have a lot of athletes that I'll have from post collegiately, 21 till, I have 3 guys right now going to worlds in discus they've been with me for 10 plus years. And it's like, give me now discus is a little different in the sense of training, but if we're looking at bounds and we're looking at skips, and then I was looking through some of your stuff, some dribbles, fast leg exercises. Can you just specify, like, let's say the best 2 to 3 of each one of those as like a takeaway for a coach who's like, all right, if I've got 13, 14-year-olds, at least I'm going to give them these drills today to apply to training so that they can try to develop the eccentric force capacity at a younger age so that their signature is more in line with what speed success really would be at that, at the best point for them later on in their career.
Yeah, there's probably 3 things that I would do as primaries that I think everybody should be doing. One is find a hill somewhere and run up it. Make sure it's not an 80 to 100 meter hill. Just look at 30 to 40 meter hills of varying different inclinations and do a lot of hill sprints. Hill sprints are pretty simple for all people. Like technically, it's a lot safer to do a hill acceleration than it is an acceleration on turf, grass, or track. It's just easier to get the foot back underneath and into a safer position. So first and foremost, do that. Second, we've talked about a lot here is skips. And I really think skips are an underutilized exercise or an underutilized tool or drill. There's many, many different ways you can do it. You set up a cone here and a cone down there at 40 meters or 40 yards or whatever, and say, okay, we're going to do 10 by 40 skips here. And I want every skip to be, you're going to be working on something slightly different. So on this first one, we're going to go frequency. I want you to skip with as high a frequency as you possibly can for 40 yards. Walk back. Okay, now we're going to go length. I want you to cover as much ground as you possibly can with each step for 40 yards. Okay, now we're going to go for height. You can just go straight up and then down, straight up and then down. And each time, obviously, there's some technical coaching instructions that go along with all of these. The boxing analogy, again, think about if you're hitting a heavy bag, what would you do with your wrist and your fist? You'd squeeze it really tight. I want you to squeeze your foot and ankle really tight as you strike the ground on all of these. I want you to really focus on that. I want you to focus on your posture, carrying yourself with some pride. Be proud as you do this. Think about the position of your pelvis. Make sure you're not dumping that back and leaning forward. Be tall and free and bouncy. Then there's going for distance. There's going for distance and height. There's going for distance and frequency. There's all sorts of different ways in which we can skip. You can find a hill, skip up a hill. So I think that's, for me, like I said, like really underutilized exercise. And finally, sprinting. And there's many different ways to constrain the sprint. I think it kills me, man. When I go out to a field or a track somewhere, there's a coach or a couple coaches, and they've got a bunch of 8 to 12-year-olds lined up and doing drills for 15 minutes. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, you are wasting their time. You're making them worse here because you're stealing this time away from doing something that can actually make them better or that they can enjoy. You know what I mean? Like, go and sprint, allow them to play and to sprint and to move and to, do things with their body and experiment rather than doing these stupid structured drills that you think is going to make them fast. So just sprint. And as I said, you can make all sorts of constraints to this. You can put some wickets out and just sprint over some wickets. Dribbles are just constrained sprints where we're constraining the range of motion. We're just truncating the range of motion. Okay, I want you to sprint as fast as you can here, but I don't want your feet to come above your knees. Okay, can you try that? Yeah, okay, I can do that. And you can have little races like this. Or now I want you to sprint as fast as you can, but your feet can't go below your knees. Now I want you to go as fast as you can. You're going to start above your knee, and by the time you're finished, your feet are just going to be over your ankle. Can you do that? So there's different ways in which you can sprint, and just play with it. And by doing this really representative task, i.e. actually sprinting in different ways, which represents every task in all sports that happen on their feet, you actually get better at the thing that we're trying to get them better for, rather than just isolating it and deconstructing it into some sort of controlled task that may look good to you, that may seem like it looks good to them and feels good to them, but it isn't really moving the needle on how they perform.
Yeah, I think that's even just listening to that. I love that because it's simple. It's like, yo, just keep it as easy as possible. I've got like 3 questions left. Fast leg drills. So someone is, in my mind, this is what is something that you've seen with the elite level sprinters that enables them? Is it the toe off position that enables them to bring their leg through quicker? Like what would these drills look like, or what would these drills be that elite level sprinters do that could be something that we could pass through to kids in middle school, high school?
I don't think you can, because I don't think they can do it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. I think the thing that separates elite sprinters from non-elite sprinters is how they interact with the ground, like how good they are at that, how they can coordinate the strike, like how the foot impacts the ground, where it does, at the velocity. It's something that's really intuitive. It's something that they do that's just better than everybody else. And I feel like almost everybody short of those people just don't do it well. And you can't really even work on it. Like you can improve upon all things, obviously, right? But I think there's so many other things to do first and foremost that can make people fast before they start working on fast leg drills and being overly planiflex and not striking and not creating the negative foot velocity that's required, so on and so forth. Like I think it's just so hard. It really is. Like you watch an elite sprinter doing a fast leg drill, and it just, man, that looks great. The timing looks good. The coordination looks good. Like they're really able. It looks so easy. And then you look at a sub-elite sprinter or a football player or a basketball player or a baseball player trying to do it, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like, stop. Just stop. Like, that just does not look good. You know what I mean? And like, if something looks unathletic and the player feels unathletic doing it, don't do it. Don't do it. Like, do something that's slightly simpler so it looks a little bit more athletic and they can feel a little bit more like an athlete. And then just add layers of complexity on top of that. Just because an elite sprinter does this really well doesn't mean that a 14-year-old kid should be practicing it. They're just not ready for it yet because it is such a complex task. You know, it's one thing you alluded to this post that the Altus team put up a couple of days ago about me talking about stop doing high knee drills. And this is the way I look at it. When you break down the sprinting cycle, there's 3 patterns that happen. There's the hip extension pattern. We've already talked about that and how important the ability to extend your hip in space and time is. Like, that's everything. That's number one. If there's anything that anybody listening to this takes away, is the importance of that. There's the hip flexion pattern, which is from the point of toe off to where the thigh blocks in front of the center mass. And that's the easiest pattern. Like, we can all do that. And that's why we spend so much time doing that pattern as drills, whether it's wall drills or A marches or A skips or A runs, because it's easy for us to coach. It's easy for us to demo as coaches. It's easy for the athletes to do, and then it's easy then for the athletes to get better at. So they feel good about themselves. We feel good about themselves. We do that now. We've done it better. Good job. Yeah, great. But it's not moving the needle on their speed. Speed is about what you do on the ground, not what you do on the air. So it's hip extension and the foot to ground interaction pattern. So the thing that you're talking about is now how is terminal swing in the braking phase? Like, how are you coordinating what goes on in the hamstring and the calf and the foot and the hip and the glute in a very complex way to strike the ground at the right speed, at the right time, the right velocity, at the right angle. And that's as I said, like that's the thing that elite sprinters do really well that almost no one else does. I started working with professional baseball teams maybe a decade ago, and a big part of what we do in our world is dribbles, as you've said, right? We do a lot of dribbling, and and I can dribble. I've been dribbling for a long time. It's pretty easy for me, and most of the people that I work with dribble really, really well because that's the sport. So we're working with return to play and some other athletes in baseball, even the non-return to play guys, and trying to teach them how to do a dribble is just, again, it's as it goes back to, if it feels athletic, if it feels unathletic and looks unathletic, it's probably not a good idea to do. Like these are professional athletes that just cannot do this. Like 90% of professional baseball players, the dribbles are terrible. We have to find a different solution. It's just that specific task, that specific pattern in sprinting, the interaction with the ground is really, really challenging. And again, I don't say just throw up your hands and say, "Oh, don't do it." Yeah, we have to do it. We have to find ways to do it. But it's probably not through fast leg drills, which are the upper echelon of how you work on these things.
Okay, I want to get into a couple questions on the coaching stuff, and then we'll be done. I wanted to go over. This is a good segue because how are you cueing athletes? How do you see cueing athletes? And maybe it's minimizing the cues or whatever it might be, but cueing them enough that they're still capable of expressing their movement as effectively as possible while almost like taking it in, and they're thinking through it and they're applying it, but they're still capable to almost flip from action to flow to action, like forceful action to flow, from forceful action to flow. How do you see this as a coach? Or how would you recommend doing this as a coach to benefit other coaches? Maybe like, hey, this is how you can cue effectively without over cueing.
Yeah. It's such an important point, really important piece of the whole coaching thing, First, I have a heuristic of my goal is every day to say nothing. Like start with that. Start with the goal of saying absolutely nothing. Obviously, we're going to say something. But once the practice actually starts, my goal is to say nothing. So that reframing of it just changes the whole relationship between the athlete and the coach on the day. Most of my technical strategic conversations or the instruction will come prior to and after the session. So prior to, and I might even set that up the night before with a few texts and a couple of videos, get them thinking about it. We'll get to the session. We'll talk about what the session is, like the details. What is the objective of this session? What are we working on here, both from a process perspective and an outcome perspective? What are some of the strategies that we're going to implement to try to improve upon this? And then just go and do it. Now it's my job now is to choose the session or the exercise or the constraints within it, which just will allow the athletes to find their own way through that. So I'm then after that like a guide or a facilitator, not a director, not somebody who says, "Hey, I want you to do it. I want you to do this, and I want you to do it this way." And then they go and do it, and then they come back, and I give them feedback on, well, you did this, and you did that, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. And they don't really get much learning from that. There's a lot of teaching going on there, but I'm not sure how much learning there is. We have to give the athlete some space to make mistakes. Coaching should be, and it should look kind of messy, while the athlete kind of tries to figure this out on their own. Our job is just to keep them in the right direction. Like set some guardrails up. And as long as they're going this way, I'm going to give them a lot of space and room to experiment and to find. If they get off the guardrails and they start walking down the wrong path, and hey, come back over. You're going the wrong way here, man. Let's come on back over here. This is what we're talking about. Maybe we just go back to that first conversation that we had to ensure that they understand it. The other thing is, and I talk to my interns about this all the time, and assistant coaches that we've had in the past, is instruction should be 10 seconds or less. Often we talk and we say more than that out of insecurity. We want to prove to the athlete how much we know, like we're smarter than you here. I need you to know what I know here. You need to listen to me because I know. And I end up giving them like a laundry list of instructions and things to think about, things to do. And athletes just walk away from that and say, well, I don't know what to do now. Like I've got too much stuff going on in my head. As you said before, it's you're either thinking or you're going, thinking or going. And then we want them to go. We don't want them to be thinking and going simultaneously. Just go. And then it's I guess one technique that I use a lot within this is mood words. So we talk about some technical instruction, some of the things in which I want you to do. All right, we're going to be pushing out this is the type of angle, and then you're going to climb out of that. So basically, you're just going to get a little bit taller with each step. Just think about getting taller, lighter, taller, lighter, taller, lighter, until you're upright. And when you're upright, I just want you to think about bouncing. So the mood words that relate to this technical instruction is, I want you to drive hard as you can. And then when you get upright, I want you to bounce. So it's drive and bounce. And then if we've done a good job through this process, when they get to a race or when they get to a place where they're not as focused on the process and it's more about the outcome, all they have to remember is the mood that they're trying to align with. All right, drive and bounce. I'm not saying it's drive and bounce. It could be anything, right? It could be push. It could be power. It could be pressure. It could be all sorts of different things. Sometimes it's bounce. Sometimes it's freedom. Sometimes it's peace. Like all of these different moods that I want them to, connect with. And if we've done a good job through the entire process, the coach and instructions will just come along for the ride.
I think that is great and makes a lot of sense, because it's also like if you're going to go in and compete, let's say with your athletes at the Olympics or at trials or at national championships, it's like, do you really want to give them a 7 to 8 minute prep discussion as they're going into the biggest race of the year, and they just, they want to stay focused on how to execute and get into that flow? What is for you? What's like, as a coach, what's the biggest failure you've had that you judge yourself on as a coach?
Oh man, you need to give me that question prior to jumping on here.
Because I like to think about, like, I think putting yourself through like your career and as an individual who's seen from the outside too, I also just like to pose this to people. It's like, what do you look back on as a failure and that has led to some type of regret that you want to make sure does not happen again?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I wouldn't necessarily redo any part of my career. Like I've been doing this for a long time, and I feel like any of the mistakes that I've made have led to who I am today. And it's very important for me to make mistakes as long as I'm continuing to learn through those mistakes. And I feel like failure only truly happens is when you make the mistake and don't learn from it. Mm-hmm. And often we make multiple mistakes before we even recognize that it was a mistake. And then we say, oh, okay, that's a mistake. I need to do this differently, better. And I've learned from it. That's no longer a failure. So I don't know if I would frame it as failures per se. I've made tons of mistakes, like lots of mistakes. And I know that I'm making mistakes today. I'll go out and coach today and I'll make mistakes today. And I'll look at some of the things that I do today in 5 years and shake my head at that guy. Say, what was that cat doing, man? That was stupid. But it's as long and I'm good with that, man. Like that's like for me. I encourage coaches to look for more ways to make mistakes because that is how we learn, right? Mm-hmm. So I need to think a little bit deeper on the failure piece, but I don't typically frame it that way. Okay. I don't know if I've failed on any of the things that I've done. Like I don't know if I think I've failed athletes. I don't think I've done a good job of coaching many athletes. And I don't think I've done a good job of understanding what is important to them and then helping them through their journey. Like I've looked back at some of the athletes I've worked with in the past and say, I didn't do a good job there. I failed that person. But I've learned from that, and I try not to do that now with the athletes that I'm working with today.
I mean, honestly, I think that answer alone, too, is like a good setup for other strength coaches, other coaches in performance to understand, like, it's okay to make these mistakes, and it's okay to fail as long as we are continuously trying to learn and get better. It's like, you can judge yourself and you can look at it, but if you're looking back and be like, well, this person I probably let down to a point as a coach, but I know how I did it, and I know what I did better moving off of that individual.
About 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 15, I started reading some work by a Welshman named Dave Snowden, and he came up with this framework called the Cynefin framework. And he talked a lot about different domains of operation and where we work. And he's a sort of a consultant now, business consultant, but we can apply this to our work. When you're working in the complex domain, and we do work in complexity. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but what we do is complex. What the athletes do is complex. The relationship is complex. There's complexity on top of complexity on top of complexity. And when we're operating in the complex domain, think about our work as being safe to fail experiments. So it's okay to experiment, as long as if it does fail, you don't blow up the whole thing. It's just, if we fail, it's safe. So think about your program as being a safe to fail experiment. You're not going to write a program that if it fails, it ruins the entire year, right? We're not going to do that. We're not going to implement a new technical change that if it doesn't work, it ruins the entire season. That's not what we do. So the other thing with safe to fail experiments is they're iterative processes. So it's a small one, then another small one, and then a small one. And the more safe to fail experiments we can run, the more we learn on the back end of it. Oh, that's what happened on this experiment. Okay, great. I'll run this other experiment in a slightly different way. Go on to the other side, look at, okay, what happened on this one? And I just think about my work, all of my work, in all senses, as multiple safe to fail experiments. I think that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, it's almost like the way you painted the sprint, literally in the beginning. It's like every moment is building upon from the previous moment, and it's setting up the next moment, and that's how life is.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted you to talk about your tool. You have a sprint tool, is it a resisted sprint tool that you guys use?
Yeah, we so the great guys at Kratos. So I met the guys at Kratos through Kelly Starrett, Wes Beercroft, who's the owner of Kratos. They did a thing, if you remember, with what's his name now? Big, strong guy. Squatted and deadlift 1,000 pounds. Why not blank on his name?
Hafthor?
Say again?
Hafthor Bjornsson or Eddie
No.
Hall or
No, American guy.
Hall?
He had a company with Kratos for a while. Still has a company. The Kabuki guy. Why am I
oh Jesus. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Of course, now I can't remember.
He's going to be pissed off at me too. He pulled 1,000 pounds. I don't think he actually squatted one. But anyways, he was doing some things with Kratos. I got a couple pieces of the Kratos flywheel technology things. This is cool. It's really well made. And then Wes.
Chris Duffin.
That's it, Chris Duffin. Sorry, Chris, if you're listening to this, my bad.
We can edit
it. Yeah. And so we started talking about, hey, what can we? He said, hey, I'm thinking about doing something like this. So he has a son who runs track at UBC, University of British Columbia in Canada, and we've been working on this resisted sprinting device. Do you think that would be something that you're interested in helping us with? So, yeah, absolutely. So this is about a year and a half ago, and we started iterating upon this resisted acceleration device. It's called the AK Altus Kratos Power Cord, and it's just a small little portable device that pulls anywhere from 0 pounds up to 40 pounds on resisted acceleration, out from anywhere from 50 meters out to 100 meters of acceleration. It's just a really small. It's fairly inexpensive, but it's a lot less expensive than some of the other options that are out there. It just costs a lot of money to make these things these days, especially with some of the tariffs that are coming through and getting everything from China. But it's a nice little resisted sprint device that's going well. I think people are really loving it. So
this would be like a more affordable version of the 1080.
No,
maybe. Not as many benefits of the 1080 in the sense of like metrics that you get back, but
exactly, it's got no data. I don't see 1080 as being our competitor here. I see like
it's simplicity. Okay, so it's like this could be something that I could get. I get the Altus Kratos tool,
Yeah.
I can take it out. We can hit resisted sprints. It's more affordable. And
Yeah.
so we can get multiple kids on here doing
Yeah.
resisted sprints, just similar to if we, let's say we were flat here, we don't have a hill nearby. We can get 5 kids on here running resisted sprints. And we don't need crazy data feedback on 13 to 16-year-old kids who just need to run, like, period.
That's exactly what it is. I thought, man, there's a massive gap in this market here. You've got the Run Rocket, which is it's a pretty good tool, but it's not portable,
Yep.
and it's not really objective. It's not, you can't set up a number and know that you're pulling 8 pounds or 10 pounds or 20 pounds. It's just numbers. And this one is small, it's portable, it's lighter, it's cheaper. It comes in a little briefcase. It goes on a track. It can go on the turf. It can go on the grass, and it's as you said, it doesn't give you any data at all. It's not going to tell you how fast you moved. I think 1080 is an incredible piece of equipment that does that really, really well. We've got a 1080. We've also got now 4 power cords, and we use the power cords every single day. It's a really cool little tool.
So it's the Altis Kratos Power Tool. Power cord. Sorry.
AK power cord. Yeah.
All right, Stu, thanks for being on. Everybody can check you out at Finger Mash on Instagram, Altis on Instagram as well. And you guys have tons of really good courses. You put out great work. Thank you for doing this. Thanks for sharing all of this information, and I hope people enjoy it as much as me.
Hey, back at you, man. I appreciate you, and appreciate you having me on, and appreciate all the work that you guys do as well.
All right, thanks, Stu. I'll see you later.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Peace.